We're so glad you joined us today. I'm Tanya Nicholson, the Associate Dean of Midwifery and Women's Health at Frontier Nursing University, and I'm excited to introduce to you Dawn Thompson, who is the founder and president of Improving Birth. She's going to talk to us today about making change happen with the consumer at the center of the team. So this presentation will address the maternity care crisis through the consumer voice and the need for unity around the common purpose of improving maternity care. Frustrated by the care she witnessed women receiving through 10 years as a community-level childbirth professional, Dawn mobilized other mothers across the country to take to the streets. And in just 2 short years, ImprovingBirth.org has grown into a powerful consumer voice with thousands of volunteers and followers across the country. Come hear what consumers are already doing to bring about change and why we know that they are the answer to this problem. She's going to share how marketing and social media can play a huge role in engaging people like never before, and how you can get involved to help usher in the transformation of maternity care in your community. Dawn is the founder of ImprovingBirth.org, and she has been in the birth industry since 2003, supporting hundreds of families as a labor and postpartum doula. Because of her own personal struggle through 3 preventable C-sections before a healing, normal birth, her passion for birth has become her life's mission. Dawn spent 5 years as vice president of the board of directors for the San Diego Birth Network, and even longer researching, informing, and educating birth workers and parents about cervical scar tissue and its effect on laboring women. She's so proud to say that she helped bring about an awareness about cervical scar tissue to the forefront of those in the birth community. Before becoming a doula, Dawn worked in marketing and public relations, owned and operated a small retail business, and ran a dental continuing education program for surgeons. So she brings all of these skills to ImprovingBirth.org in her goal of transforming maternity care from the inside out. So without further ado, but with removal of the headphones, we're going to transition here, and I'm going to ask Dawn to come join me, and she's going to talk to you about this wonderful subject. Dawn?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking the time online. Hopefully, it's always a little bit more awkward when you're doing an online class than doing it in front of a bunch of people. Hope you don't look silly with the headset on. Funny hair, all that stuff. So the first thing I like to do is I typically like with starting with the with an image, right? So I'd like for you guys to just take a second, and wherever you are watching this, hopefully you're not listening to it while you're driving. If you are, please don't participate in this part. But I'd like for everyone to just close their eyes and take a deep breath. And now I want you to imagine that our nation's C-section rate is below 15%. Inductions are only used for necessary medical indications. Decision-making isn't driven by liability and profitability. The infant and maternal mortality rate is not only stabilized but lower. And midwives are doing the majority of births, and they are autonomous. And that all women are treated with respect and dignity during childbirth. I'd love for you to help me hold that vision, because I really feel strongly about intention, and intention is very powerful. You can open your eyes, and I just want to say that I really believe that this is possible, and I also believe that it will happen in my lifetime. So it's going to take me a little getting oriented with the presentation and the notes, so please forgive me if I kind of stumble on the forward of this. Doing it online is a little bit different than in person. So what's the story? What are we crazy consumer advocates out here doing anyways, and why are we doing it? Well, we all know the numbers. But what I want to talk about is the story behind the numbers. I want to talk about what the consumer is telling us. And I also want to share what I've witnessed myself as a birth professional, because I think that a lot of things can be chalked up and dismissed, but as anecdotal and those sorts of things. But I want to just share with you what I have seen and heard. And really, why we think or what we're doing, Improving Birth is doing to bring awareness, and also why we think the consumer is the answer, or at least part of the answer, and what we think that we can do together to bring that vision to life. So a little about myself. I'm a mother of 6. I know when she did my intro, it said that I had 4 births. 2 of my children are my stepchildren, but I've raised them since they were little, so they're my kids. There's no differentiation for me. Anyways, I've got 3 of them in college, all at the same time. We did not really think that one through. We're always broke. Anyways, but we live in San Diego, and like she said before, I've been a birth worker for about 12 years, and I've assisted over 300 families in the birth and postpartum period with a previous background of marketing and public relations. So I started Improving Birth 4 years ago. With the intention of bringing awareness to what I saw was serious problems in the maternity care system. After spending some time on social media, I was very resistant, by the way, to Facebook, because I thought, who has time for that? Who has time for socializing when I had a family and a raging birth business and, all the other things that go along with that. Anyways, but I finally got onto it and realized, after talking with many birth professionals, including OBs and midwives, doulas, nurses, basically every aspect. I wasn't just talking to doulas. I realized that what I was seeing in my community was really an epidemic, and it was being seen everywhere. And that it wasn't just in my posh community where I lived in San Diego. And so I just decided to take my community planning skills and my marketing and organization skills, and I knew that we could get some pretty serious media attention by doing a big national event. And the rally on Labor Day was born. So when you see the phrase abuse in childbirth, I think it makes most people feel pretty uncomfortable. And I'm going to apologize now, because I am going to probably make people feel a little uncomfortable today. But I think that it's important when we share the stories and then move forward after we know what's happening. So I know that when I think of the phrase abuse in childbirth, I think often you just think of some physical altercation. At least that's what I think. Someone being held down, or we've heard of women like in the Renat J case, where she was begging not to be cut open for a cesarean while she was being put under. Or, as many of you, I hope, have seen Kelly's forced episiotomy video. Those, to me, are abuses in childbirth. And those are really extreme cases, right? We know that those are extreme cases, and we know that they're definitely happening too frequently, but that's not really the main issue that we're finding. So the World Health Organization, in the 2014 statement on the prevention and elimination of disrespect and abuse, describes it as outright physical abuse, profound humiliation, verbal abuse, coercive or unconsented medical procedures, lack of confidentiality, failure to get fully informed consent, refusal to give pain medication, gross violations of privacy, and refusal of admission to health facilities. There's also a few more things on this list that pertain more to other countries that we just don't deal with here. That statement also goes on to talk about the fact that young women, unmarried women, women of color, and women from lower socioeconomical situations are the ones most likely to experience the abuse. And we all know these numbers, but I think it's just a good reminder when we're moving forward in this conversation. So, so the stories behind the statement is so what does the statement look like in reality in the US? Because obviously it's, that the World Health Organization was making that statement for all kinds of countries and all kinds of situations. So the question is, what does it really look like here? And I can tell you that I've been witnessing birth for 12 years, and I've worked with some of the most incredible midwives, nurses, and doctors. I've seen incredible births, empowered, traumatic, easy, long, hard. I've had the pleasure of even catching a couple that, because they fall out sometimes. and you just got to catch them when they're coming. But when I went back to the WHO statement again here, because what I've also witnessed is coercion, manipulation, unconsented procedures, and flat out abusive behavior. And I highlight here in the World Health Organization because this is really what we see, and this is really where we see the most complaints. And it's about coercive and unconsented medical procedures and the fail to get fully informed consent. And so I highlighted that here because I felt like that's really what we're talking about from the US perspective. So the first thing I'd like to do is share a story, and I'm going to go through a few slides here, and I'm going to share quotes that I have actually heard myself and or have heard just from my colleagues. But the first story I want to tell you is something I witnessed myself, and it was a face presentation, and that's why I have these images up here of face presentations. And so I was with this mom. This was her third baby. So I'd been with her for all three. This was our third birth together. So I knew her fairly well. And I went to the she'd been calling me off and on throughout the day and telling me that she was kind of having surges, but not really. She'd gone to a birthday party with her kids. And well, when the labor picked up in the afternoon, it's like a freight train. And so her husband called and said, can you come? And of course I was already ready, and I started to go. And then he called me back and he said, no, you need to meet us at the hospital. I think the baby's coming. And so I get to the hospital. I live very close to the hospital, and I'm anticipating they live quite a bit farther. And maybe 10 minutes versus my 5 minutes. So I get there, and I anticipated I'd be waiting for a few minutes, and suddenly I hear this car screeching around the corner, and in comes this car coming through, hitting the speed bumps at ridiculous speeds. And he jumps out of the car and he says, the baby's coming. And so I just, go over to the car and I open her car door, and sure enough, she's got, the saucers. Her eyes are saucers, and she's lifting herself up out of the chair, and she's saying, oh, the baby's coming. And I try to just ease her fear because I can tell she's just absolutely petrified. And so I just say, it's okay. We're right where we're supposed to be. We're here. And I just said, let me just see if the baby is I was concerned that is the baby on the perineum at this point, or is she just only getting the urge to push, and she's fighting it. So I just, she was fully clothed. I just reached between her legs to just feel if there was a bulge in her perineum. And thankfully there was not one. So I said, we're okay. We have time. It's all right. And so we got her wheelchair and we wheeled her in, and we get in there, and they immediately do a vaginal exam. And the first nurse does an exam, and she checks her, and she says she's 3 centimeters. And I actually laughed out loud because obviously I'd been with this mother a couple of times. This was definitely not 3 centimeters. You know, she's shaking. Her eyes are rolling back in her head. She's, you know, doing all of the things that a woman in transition who's about to start pushing her baby out is doing. And she seemed confused. And so another nurse comes in and does another vaginal exam. And she said, it's a hand. And she tells my client to stop pushing. And my client is, you know, looking at me like, you know, what on earth, how do I stop pushing? So I help her. We're breathing. We're just trying to breathe through it. And they said, it's a hand. We need an ultrasound machine. So they bring an ultrasound machine in. And, you know, they stick it on, and the nurse says, yes, it's a hand, the baby's transverse. Stop pushing. If you don't stop pushing, you could break your baby's arm. So we are all, you know, doing the best that we can to help her not push. And of course, it's overwhelming in every sense of it. She's unmedicated, and her labor has been going very fast. So in walks now a third nurse to do another vaginal check. This one is the head of nursing in the department, and she does a check, and she's, you know, you could tell she's confused also, and then she finally says, it's not a hand, this is the baby's face. It's the baby's face. And so she says, give me the ultrasound machine. They wheel it back over and they check, and she confirms this is the baby's head down. It's just a face presentation. And she feels around, you know, the perimeter of the baby's head and says, and by the way, my client is almost 6 foot tall. So she's a bigger gal, not overweight or anything, but just tall and big woman. So she says that this is your third baby. You've plenty of spare. Just go ahead and give me a push. And she pushes, and the baby is great. She says the baby's fine on the monitor. I think, you know, it looks like it's fine. So just go ahead and give it a whirl. So she starts pushing again. And now the doctor walks in, and he comes over to do a vaginal exam also. And he sticks his hands in, and he says, give me a push. And she pushes. And he stands up and turns around to the staff, and he says, we're doing a C-section. Not talking to the mother, nothing. He just tells the staff we're doing a C-section. And my client says, wait, no, why? I don't want to have a C-section. And he said, if you try and push this baby out of your vagina, you're going to snap her neck. In that tone, everything. He's been in the room for all of a minute and a half, maybe at the most. This is not her doctor. They have no relationship whatsoever. The staff preparing for the cesarean leaves the room and leaves only the nurse, myself, her husband, and her sister. And she's just struggling every second, trying to hold this baby in and not push. And she's doing lots of this, you know, that I'm giving her my 2 fingers to blow out like a candle, you know, just to give her a focal point. And instead what she's doing is, you know, because she can't not push. And she's just like looking at me and begging. She's like, I have to push. I have to push. And I kept just looking at the monitor. And obviously I have not gone to school for monitoring. I'm not as a doula. It's totally out of my scope. But I have been doing this a long time. And I know what a good monitor looks like, or what a good baby shows up on that thing. And, you know, obviously a margin of error and all of those things. But I just said, look at the monitor. I said, what did the nurse tell you? And she said, she told me that the baby was fine. And I said, the baby still looks fine to me. And she said, I have to push. And I said, trust your instincts. And so she just started pushing. And the whole time I'm whispering in her ear, because I don't, you know, I need to just give her the power. And she said, my baby is fine. I need to push the baby out. And I said, well, then push your bloody guts out, honey, before they come back. So she only does probably 2 pushes. And she starts to say, oh, the baby's coming. I can feel the burning. I feel the burning. And the nurse goes over, and she lifts up the blanket, and she looks between her legs, and she says under her breath, oh God, the baby's coming. And she puts the blanket and she opens the door and yells, I need help in here. And everybody comes running, and I'm like, great, everybody's going to get ready, and we're going to do a vaginal delivery. And instead, they walk in and start taking the brakes off the bed. Nobody even looks to see if the baby's on the perineum or anything. And she is begging, somebody check me, please, the baby's coming, the baby is coming. And they're not even acknowledging her. They're just pushing her out the door. And the doctor comes in and he says, what the hell is going on? And I said, doctor, she said the baby's coming. She can feel the burning. Can you please check her? And he said, no, we're doing a C-section. And she starts begging him, please, please just check me. The baby is coming. The baby's coming. I can just check me. And he says, no. And they take her and wheeling her down the hall. And her husband is just looking at me like a deer in headlights. He does not know what to do. He's a naturally passive, non-aggressive man. And I'm crying, and I'm just saying to him, you demand that they check her. Demand that they check her. And I'm screaming this in the hallway at the hospital, which sends that same head nurse out to see what the heck is going on. And she says, what is going on? And I said, she could feel that the baby was coming out. She could feel the burning, and she begged him to check her, and he refused. And she said, okay, let me just go see what I can do. And she went inside the OR and came back out, and she said, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. And so now I'm standing outside of the OR, and forgive me, I'm going to get emotional just telling the story. And I stood there with her sister, and we just sobbed because I felt helpless, because I knew that mama was having an unnecessary cesarean. And I just stood there and cried, and the doctor came out of the door, and he looked at me and he said, it won't be long now, very condescendingly. And he went to the lounge, the doctor's lounge, which was just a few feet down the walkway, and he walked right in and he turned right back around. And I think he was just deciding what it was he was going to say to me, and he needed some time. And so he came over and he walks out and he says, which one of you's the doula? And I said, that would be me. Like it wasn't obvious. I said, that'd be me. And he put his finger in my face and he said, you better watch it, young lady. And I said to him, what you're doing right now is wrong. She begged you to check her. And he said, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And if you don't keep your mouth shut, I'm going to kick you out of this hospital. And there was nothing more I could say. And so he went back in the room. And we stood there for what, seemed like 10 minutes and, just waiting to hear the cry of the baby. And all I could do was just sob. I just cried. We just stood there, her sister and I. And the doors open about 10 minutes later. And the doctor that had gone in there to assist with the surgery walked out, and he said, she did it herself. And we said, wait, what? What do you mean she did? What does that mean? And he said, she pushed the baby out. And her sister and I are literally sobbing and laughing and jumping up and down. And we're holding on to each other and we're jumping up and down and absolutely thrilled. And we never heard the baby cry. The baby never cried. And so then he says, baby's great. She's doing just fine. Mama's fine. The baby never cried because she was just right up on mama's chest, and she barely made a whimper, and so we never heard it. But what happened was the dad heard the confrontation in the hallway between the doctor and myself. And he said, I need you to tell me why you're about to cut my wife open. And it gave mom just enough time. And she pushed the baby out flat on her back. While everybody was checking instruments and counting instruments and getting ready, she just pushed her baby out with nobody. There was nobody there. She just pushed the baby out right onto the table and eventually sat up and just picked up her baby on the OR table. And I guess apparently the doctor was trying to convince the dad that, the risks and, all of these things. And then suddenly he realized that the baby had come out. And so he said, "I'm sorry, never mind. I have to go catch your baby instead." But he didn't make it across the room. This mother filed a complaint and never heard a word. No response from the hospital at all. So I know that's like a really heavy story, and although it had a happy ending for the most part, this mother suffered tremendously for the time with postpartum depression. They had planned to have more kids, and they decided not to have any more. She was so traumatized by that experience, by being forced to hold her baby inside, by thinking and fearing that she was going to snap her baby's neck or break her baby's arm. There was no care or patience, or even in an emergency, that you can still, the words that we use are so powerful. And it's why some of the things I'm going to share with you, quotes, your words matter. And even though they might not seem harmful, when you're trying to get someone to do what you think is best for them, it doesn't mean that they don't do harm. So I'd like to share some quotes about coercion and manipulation that I've experienced. "If you don't let me check your dilation, I can't continue to care for you." This was said to a mama during her 39-week appointment when she was just saying she didn't feel that a vaginal exam was necessary. She didn't think that she was giving birth anytime soon. Your placenta stops working at 40 weeks, and your baby won't be getting any nutrients, so we must induce by your due date. This is a doctor whose belief system is that 39 to 40 weeks is what you do. This was a low-risk first-time mom. Since you did IVF, if you aren't induced by 40 weeks, your baby will probably die. And you've worked so hard for him. Anyways, I could go on and on about that one. No, the vacuum won't harm your baby at all. It's perfectly safe. This was suggested to a mom. Her baby was not in distress. She'd only been pushing for about 40 minutes. And the baby wound up with a large hematoma on her head. Your cervix is posterior and closed, so we need to go ahead and schedule that cesarean because you won't be able to birth this baby vaginally. This is said to a mother at her 38-week prenatal appointment. "Girl, if you know what's best for you, you'll listen to me," said in that tone. This was said to a young Black mother who arrived in labor at 4 centimeters. And just a couple of hours later, it was somewhere between 2 and 3 hours later, they suggested that she have Pitocin because she wasn't really progressing. And even though they had just checked her and told her she was over 7 centimeters, and she was still unmedicated, she refused. She didn't want medication, and she didn't want Pitocin, and didn't feel she needed Pitocin. But the doctor continued to come in for the next hour every few minutes and bully and pressure her and tell her horrible things. Thankfully, how she managed to get to complete in that hour, I do not know. Because, normally fear limits labor so much, but instead I think it caused her to rush, like she needed to get this baby out. But so she'd only been pushing for about 20 minutes. And without discussion, he cut an episiotomy and put a vacuum on that baby's head, even though we could already see the baby's head after 20 minutes of pushing. And then when he finished her repair, he said to her that she nearly had ruined his dinner plans for taking so long. Her entire labor was like 6.5 hours. As doulas, you often start working with the same providers over and over again. You know, it's when I very first started, I worked with the same group a lot because one of the doctors in practice was my neighbor, and she was very pro natural childbirth. And you know, one of the big coercive things that we hear is the myth of the big baby. And I'm sharing this just as a backdrop, but it's a quote from Evidence-Based Birth story on or article and research on big baby. But I'm telling this story because it's the art of manipulation. When you start working with the same doctors a lot, you can see sometimes their pattern of manipulation. Or ultimately, in their case, I mean, she probably just believes it's her belief system, and it's what she thinks is best. It's her preferences, right? So this doc, I did a lot of births with her. They were referring me out a lot, which was great. And really, I like her. I like her on a personal level. But what I realized was that the 36 weeks with all of her patients, they would call me, some of them just sobbing, like, oh my God, she said my baby's really big, and then I'm going to have to get an induction, and I don't want to have an induction. And I realized that this was happening with every single patient. And that every appointment after 36 weeks, she would do measurements, and she'd say, oh, you're measuring ahead. It's a big baby. It's going to be a big baby, and do an ultrasound at every opportunity. Yes, it's a big baby. We're going to definitely have to induce it at 9 weeks. And so eventually I started preempting this instead. And so if they hired me, I would say, okay, so at 36 weeks, this is what the doctor's going to say. And they would call me after their 36-week appointment, and they would say, it's exactly what she said, and almost word for word. And sometimes they would, in most of the cases, they would say, no, well, willing to take the risks of a big baby. And, and almost always they did just fine and had great deliveries. But the part that was a problem for me was the fact that I realized that I was creating mistrust between them and their provider. And I had to stop accepting patients from them because it wasn't fair. I knew that I was suddenly not making birth safe or less safe because now they didn't trust their care provider. And that to me wasn't okay. And so instead, I started encouraging them if they would call from that office. I would say, I'm no longer taking patients from that practice. And this is why I'm not taking people from that practice. And if you'd like to explore other options, I do know providers in our area that are more evidence-based and not worrying about big baby. So some other quotes that I've wanted to share that I've heard, and some of these were given to me by other people, so I want to clarify that not all of these are things that I've heard myself, although I think there's only one in here or two or from other people. But the amount of myths, right, and them are extreme examples. It's the point across. You can't get out of bed after your water breaks because the baby's all out. I have heard this on more than one occasion from nurses in a facility. You have a 75% risk of uterine rupture. And we can change this number 40%. 40% is probably the most typical that I use. 55%, 50%, 60%. I've heard the most, variations, nothing of any consistency, and certainly nothing that's accurate. But this is for a mom who wasn't a high risk VBAC. She qualified. She had a low transverse incision with her first baby. She had dilated to completion. She had pushed for a couple of hours, and the baby was found to be asymptomatic to get out. She just wasn't enough time. But well, we can only assume that that's possible, that she would have maybe if she'd had more time to move around with her baby. But needless to say, she was a great candidate for a VBAC. You can't have skin to skin and delayed cord clamping because the blood will drain back into the baby. So which is it? This was coming from the on-call because her midwife, and it was actually a midwife, another midwife, her midwife that she'd been seeing was not on call that night. And of course, she had discussed skin to skin and delayed cord clamping, and that, you know, the midwife had said, of course, we do all those things as standard practice. And when this baby came out, she left the baby on the foot of the bed. The doctor just laid the baby on the foot of the bed until the cord stopped pulsating. So she couldn't even hold her baby. Once you go past 40 weeks, your risk of uterine rupture quadruples. This was said to, obviously, a VBAC mom who was a great candidate. No, in labor, you can labor in the tub, but your baby will drown if you give birth in the tub. Seriously, folks. You're drowning your baby right now. You need to have a cesarean. Your baby is likely to have brain damage at this point. Don't do a C-section. This is, granted, the monitor was showing D cells during the pushing, but it was coming back, and it was normal in compression. It did not get the baseline was in between the 120s and the 130s, and it was getting down to the it was like, you know, the 105, 110. It was dropping very, very little. But this is what the doctor was saying, that your baby likely have brain damage, right? And that you're drowning your baby. You're drowning your baby right now. But this is also the same doctor who just told her a paraplegic could push better than you. He had just told her that a few minutes before. Thankfully, she didn't give in, and she demanded a few more minutes, and she pushed out her baby just a couple minutes later with APGARs of 9. And the baby is now 4 years old with no signs of brain damage or drowning. Undermining. The undermining is where, I mean, this is typically coming from the nursing staff, chuckling and rolling her eyes at my client. Oh, you took a Bradley class, and have a birth plan. Birth plan equals cesarean. You should just sign those consent forms for that cesarean now, because maybe it'll lift the curse of your birth plan. You realize you're just here for a trial of labor, right? You're likely going to have another cesarean. You know, people don't actually have VBACs around here. And why are you doing this to yourself? You know you're not going to get a gold star or anything, right? And I'd like to tell you that both of those last happened to me personally during. And I've heard these in so many variations for mamas who are just laboring, not even just VBACs, but just laboring in general. And this was a doozy. I had the bed right outside the door ready to wheel you to the OR. That must have been what lifted the curse of your birth plan. In addition, I have witnessed a number of uninformed and unconsented procedures, including all these listed: episiotomies, vacuum extraction. I've obviously described some of those stories to you. Vaginal exams, membrane sweeps, membrane ruptures, a membrane rupture including a provider check when the mom refused to have her membranes or her membrane ruptured. She said, no, I don't want them ruptured. But he said, well, I'll just go ahead and do a check. And then as he puts his hand in there, and then he smiles at her and he goes, oops, I lied. And he broke her water. So we hear about women from all over the country being dropped from care, threatened with child protective services, even going as far as having child protective services called on them when they wouldn't consent to a cesarean or decline standard newborn procedures like erythromycin, vitamin K, and Hep B. Some even have gone as far as getting court orders and false information. So I'm going to share one last story. I put this quote because it's a story in once, an episiotomy, once a little snip childbirth routine curbed by two new guidelines in 2012. Well, thank goodness the majority of the time episiotomies are not being done anymore, but we know that they are still happening. I mean, you've got one hospital in the same town, two hospitals in the same town serving the same population, and one has a 5% episiotomy rate and the other one has a 60% episiotomy rate. And this is just numbers from the last 2 years. So we know it's happening. And obviously we know Kelly's case. The video happened to me. But the story that I want to share is with another client of mine, and first-time mom, very quick labor for a first time. I think it was 6 hours total. They called me over. Her labor was intense already, and it was very obvious to me when I got there that we needed to leave right away. This was not a let's labor home kind of thing. When we got to the hospital, she was already complete, almost complete. I think she was like maybe 9 centimeters or something. And the mama is pushing. She's pushing beautifully. She's pushing beautifully with the nurse. Again, some head compression stuff going on, but again, minor, staying above 100. The doctor comes in. He's been there for maybe 5 minutes. And I see that there's a tray next to him, and he reaches over and he's putting his fingers in there and pulling out her perineum. And I think to myself, oh my God, he's about to cut an episiotomy and he's not even going to talk to her. But I thought, no, he's going to talk to her about it. He's going to ask her any second. And I already know that she doesn't want an episiotomy. She was, she'd done her birth plan. We walked through it. She talked about it. That was very important to her. No episiotomy. And on her next push, he puts the scissors in his hands and he starts to put them to her perineum. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. And he just turned around and looked at me and shot daggers. And I said, Brittany, can you, her name actually was Brittany. Brittany, can you please tell, do you want to talk to him about episiotomy? And I look at him and I said, she said very clearly in her birth plan that she did not want an episiotomy. And distress. Now, he's never said anything about that before. I need to get the baby out. We need to just do this quickly. And you don't get to question me. And he cut an episiotomy. And then he pulled me aside afterwards and he said, that's unacceptable that you intervened in that situation. It's not your position. It's not your right to do that. And, I beg to differ, but she never filed a complaint. Very frustrating. So feel like I want to just shake that off a little bit. Sharing negative stories is never comfortable, and a bunch of the stuff, because of the mention in the slides before, I started Improving Birth, and my intention was in the beginning just to raise awareness, because I felt like people had no idea. So many women were just walking into these scenarios with providers and hospitals that lacked in evidence, and they just had no idea. And so I felt really strongly that it was necessary to bring awareness. So Improving Birth at this point has been really very successful in doing that. With our Labor Day rallies, blog posts, and mainstream articles, excuse me, I'm just getting a little off track. I apologize. So what we've mastered is earned. Specialists say is the most difficult to get, but it's also the most impactful. So, they described it as advertising without paying for it, essentially. So each year during the rally, it brings an average of 250 news stories, including newspapers, magazines, in-studio interviews in at least 80 cities across the country. And the viewership totals reach into the millions each year, every time when we consider all of the different outlets. But social media has also been where we've had huge impact, with photo campaigns like the silence. The Break the Silence campaign was hugely successful last summer. We reached over a million clicks, over 250,000 people engaged. But this summer, without any effort on our part, it took off again all by itself. We have no idea what happened. We don't know where it got shared. But in 5 days, we had over 7 million clicks and 700,000 people engaged. And engagement means they either clicked, liked, or shared the images. And so in 5 days, we had those huge numbers. And if we look at what we saw over the 2 weeks that it launched itself, the reach was significantly more than that, but only measured 5 days at a time. So consumers are becoming more aware of what evidence-based care and abuse in childbirth looks like. And informed consumers, unfortunately, are often seen as bad. It's like they get that, oh, great, you're one of those. And they're often faced with that, like, look, honey, I'm the expert here. Just do what I tell you to do and everything will be just fine. But things are not just fine. The C-section rate and the unnecessary intervention rate stay high, so does the incidence of postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and symptoms of PTSD. Up to 1/3 of women in a survey that we did found that they had symptoms that showed symptoms of PTSD. Up 1/3. But social media seriously changed everything. It's leveling the playing field. We have a direct line to women now at this point, and it busts open the monopoly that was held before on information by providers and hospitals only. Granted, look, not everything is good information, and we get that. There's bloggers out there, there's anecdotal stuff, but guess what? The peer-reviewed studies and articles are out there, and they're easy to find. as well as evidence-based websites like Evidence-Based Birth and Improving Birth, where we're putting the information, solid information, at their fingertips. And people are coming together in a whole new way. They're sharing information, but more importantly, they're sharing their stories. They're coming together to support and encourage each other. And Improving Birth is a platform. So one of the other things that we've done is wrote a letter to Acog this year. And earlier this year in the spring, Hermine Hayes Klein of Human Rights and Childbirth, Robin Lim, Jenny Joseph, and Molly Arthur from APA, and we all participated in a closed-door meeting with the executive staff of Acog in the hopes of opening some lines of communication. And during that meeting, we were really pleased to hear Acog's objectives regarding recognizing women as a decision maker in maternity care, as well as their move toward more collaborative relationships among various maternal health care providers. We're thrilled to hear it, and we've continued the communication through email since that meeting as a collective. But Improving Birth, on behalf of the consumers this summer, sent a letter just before the rally to specifically address disrespect and what the consumers are saying. We shared our deep concern with the report from women. We shared our deep concern about the reports from women about failure to inform consent and honoring informed refusal. And we asked them to help us and join as our allies to avoid tactics of bullying and coercion. You know, they've got excellent committee opinions about informed consent and about force. And what we need to do is be working together, all of our organizations working together to eliminate such conduct in facilities everywhere, not just, you know, it's happening in birth centers too. So I forgot to move that part forward. Sorry. You can go ahead and see the Acog letter on our website if you would like to get some more information. So Improving Birth has also created toolkits on our website. We have both a trauma toolkit and a complaint toolkit. But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be, at this point, an effective or meaningful system of accountability regarding mistreatment in maternity care. The volunteers around the country and the women who contact us regularly report that complaints made to the hospitals are routinely ignored. And I've seen that. I shared that with just one of my other clients. They're routinely ignored or they're just justified as mere communication lapses. Or, you know, yeah, sometimes that guy's just got bad bedside manner. While responses from the state licensing boards are glacially slow, and investigations, if they do happen, they happen behind closed doors. Litigation is the very last resort, but is a blunt and slow-moving tool that is inaccessible for most women. And as we've discovered, unless there is a dead baby and a dead mama, it's almost impossible to find a lawyer to represent these women. I want to be clear about that. I could do a whole nother presentation, and might, about perceived liability concerns, because they are perceived. It only takes one $11 million judgment story to scare the daylight of thousands of providers. And then they start making decisions out of fear of liability that, quite frankly, is rare. Okay. So I get that also, I don't want to stand up here, and I feel like, it's really easy to stay in the dark places, right? It's really easy to stay with the women in their anger. Improving Birth did such a great job in the couple of years of trying to keep a positive message, and we built, and we gained some steam. But you know what happened? Then we went dark, and we did the Break the Silence campaign, and we exploded. People want to be pissed off. They want to be angry, and they want to have someone hear them. And that's what we've been doing. But we also have to get back to this place of I don't want to stand up here and be like, you're all horrible, because I know you're not. I know that even some of these offenders that I'm sharing with you care about the people that they care for. And I know that some of you have been fighting the maternity care system for as long as the rest of us have. And I guess I want to say that it is different now, and the consumer is what's different. And I mentioned before the social media, that's what makes it different. It's the digital activism. It's like it's nothing like we've ever had before. Everything I've shared in the past few slides are examples of it. According to research from the University of Michigan, the Digital Activism Research Program, digital activism, say that fast 3 times, is typically nonviolent and tends to work best when social media tools are combined with street-level organization. I was thrilled to read that, because I did that without knowing that some university proved that it was extremely effective. One key measure of success of a social movement is getting people onto the streets. Street protests alone do not always achieve the goals, but moving away from the computer and moving out into the streets to march is a crucial goal for our groups trying to initiate change. These days, one thing makes the study of modern social movements so interesting is that when people march, they stay connected. Taking to the streets is still an important goal of online activism. But these days, when people take to the streets, they take their mobile phones with them. And so they're documenting things, they're staying connected. And I'm saddened all the time at how few midwives who should be fighting right along with us. It's not just the consumer, and or encouraging your consumer to get out there. Tell them about Improving Birth. Tell them about the other consumer organizations. We've all been there, right? We've had that client who had a traumatic first birth, who's telling us their story, right? Telling us their story of this traumatic birth. Give them the resources. Find Improving Birth. Join us. Help us move this forward. I love this Frederick Douglass. He's a great abolitionist. He once said, "This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will." I felt like that was a really powerful quote, because it signifies everything that we've been doing and the importance of why the consumer is the answer. Power concedes nothing without demand, because we know that all of these things come back to a power struggle. All those abuses, they come back to a power struggle of a woman saying, "I want something different than what you're offering me, even if it doesn't make you feel comfortable." I cannot stand up here. I'm not standing up here. I can't sit here and begin to understand what providers are up against in the hospital. But I do know what the mother is going through. We do know that there's hierarchy, but that all of you are on the front lines and often work within a system that's broken and hard to change. but you are the ones who can continue to encourage the system towards women-centered, non-pathologic care. We also know that there's incredible division among midwives in this country. And I really hope that when you guys are sorting all of this out, because I have to believe that you will, because the women need you. The women need you to figure it out. But I hope that you will always remember to keep what they need and they want at the forefront of all of this decision making that has to happen to improve maternity care. And I also want to encourage you to call in your colleagues. Call them in. I say call them in, not calling them out. Because what happens when that colleague is considered in a higher position than you, or if that person is someone you love and respect, what happens when you are that person? If you see some of the behavior that we've talked about today, bring attention to it, because it's often not meant to be harmful. People, I said it already, I know that they don't necessarily understand that their words can be perceived and harmful. One of the things that, one of my quotes, the quotes that I heard is, I wish I could remember it now, but it was basically saying, like, just because you think different than I think doesn't mean that you have the authority over me. And I wish I could think of that quote. I wish I would add it here. I'm sorry. It just came to my mind when I was thinking it. But I'll be the first person to say that the anger that these women is feeling is valid. But mistakes are mistakes. I know that when these mistakes are committed by people who are in our community, it makes it more challenging. But most of these people do care. And I know that they want to see, we all want to see on the other side of this hurt, pain, and trauma. There's a big difference between trauma of the maternity care system and trauma in childbirth. We've all seen traumatic births because of one medical indication or just bad positioning of a baby and torturous labor. And it didn't matter how much we supported them for normal physiological birth. It was still torturous. Those happen. And women suffer from postpartum depression and PTSD just the same from those events. But there's a big difference between trauma in maternity care and trauma in childbirth. We've got to be able to recognize the difference. And we must be willing to offer, though, compassion and patience as a way to build this road that we've never taken before. There's always been this power, right, in maternity care once we took it out of the home. Now, I'm not opposed to calling out. Instead of calling, I'm not saying that you should be only calling in instead of calling out, because let's face it, there are some constant offenders out there that are abusive and need to be weeded out of the system. Other professionals have told me, though, that their jobs are at risk. They're risk to be bullied if they report. And I can't really help you with that. I don't have a solution to that. I don't know. And you have to outweigh your risks. But what I do know is that these mothers who are being abused need you. And if it's nothing else, encouraging them to file complaints and to do something about it. The other thing that you can do is when a woman tells you her story, believe her. It's reported to us regularly that the complaints go ignored, like I said before. And these reports from women are critical to public health, not least because they shed light upon the statistics that we are all concerned about. Right? I'm sharing these stories because we know the numbers. There are women behind these numbers. There are family. There are children behind these numbers. Our natural inclination is to justify especially when we know it's happening among our ranks. But all that does is alienate the person and perpetuate the problem. I challenge you, even, I know this might be out of line for me, but I'm going to say it anyways. I challenge you to help create reform in your facility where you work about the complaint process. Go to your administrative and make sure that women's complaints are being addressed and that the women are being contacted and saying, we received your complaint. We're sorry that this happened to you, and we're doing this, this, and this as measures to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's all women want, really. They just want to know and hear from someone that they were heard. And also encouraging your hospital to create things to protect the staff to be able to call out their colleagues and not have their jobs at risk. I made all these recommendations were given to me. I don't know, right here, I'm a childbirth advocate, and I've been a doula, but I've never worked in the system. And so, all of these recommendations were given to me from other providers in hospital. So I don't want to stand up here and pretend that I know. And I know that every hospital is different and everybody's situation is different. So I'm making these recommendations, but you do know what you can do in your facility. And I'm just encouraging you to take that step. Also, I really talk to us. We really want to know and understand the dynamics and the constraints that you face in a facility, because the only way that we're going to find solutions to this maternity care crisis is by working together. And the consumer is a powerful tool. So talk to us, participate with us at every possible moment. Join us. This is improvingbirth.org. This is our website, our Facebook page. This is my cell phone number. Call me, email me, whatever. We want to talk to you. We want to figure this out. Also, though, I want you to feel encouraged that you alone, because as much as we need you, we know that you also need us. And the consumer is here to fight for your position and the importance the midwives will have in the change that must come to maternity care. We also need to get back to basics. The midwifery model of care, right? Back to the midwifery model of care whenever possible. I found this online, and I think it's an edited version of something Ina May once said, but the midwifery model of care is female-centered. Within it, birth is something that women do, not something that happens to them. The birthing woman is the central agent, the essential oneness of mind and body, and the power of woman is recognized. This is where we need to get back to. And female-centered and women as the central agent. I hope that when you're caring for women that you can see that. What we need, what the woman needs, what we need is transparency. We need respect in decision-making and understand that these women have the right to choose, even if it's not what you would choose for yourself. Women-centered care, we need to put the woman and not the technology at the center of her care. And we need those who care for us to be autonomous, and we're going to fight for that autonomy for you. But you have to engage your consumer as well, like I said before. It's one of my favorite women in history. I'm so sad that we lost her this last year, but it's my favorite quote. I quote her often, and I've lots of many quotes from her, but this is one of my favorites. I've learned people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Maya Angelou. We must keep our eyes on the prize, the safety and well-being of mothers and babies. Having them just walk out of the hospital alive is not enough. I'd like to share this slideshow. I'm hoping it'll work. I'm not sure if it'll work the same, but I'm going to give it a whirl. Yes, so just bear with me for a second. But some of you probably have already seen it, but it's a favorite of mine. I'm not sure how to get back to my screen. Oh, there it is. I got it. So thank you for sitting through that for a minute. The last thing I just want to say is that this movement is simple. It's not about natural birth versus medicated birth. It's not about hospital birth versus birth center or home birth. It's about women being capable of making safer, more informed decisions about their care and that of their babies when they're given full and accurate information about their options, including the potential harms, benefits, and alternatives. This is about respect for women and their decision-making in childbirth, including how, where, and with whom they give birth, and most importantly, the right to be treated with dignity and compassion. Thanks so much.